It was Christmas dinner, 2019. Much simpler times. When I found out a close family friend was a strong advocate for vaccine choice, or allowing children to go to public schools without being vaccinated. I was taken aback and honestly a bit disappointed in her. But I wanted to understand her relationship with the movement, even if I was strongly opposed to it. I tried to begin a discussion, and we talked about it a bit at the dinner table, although I got some dirty looks from my parents. And then we resumed our Christmas cheer. There were a few reasons, though, why I ended up feeling unsatisfied with our conversation. I left that evening wanting to better understand why this college-educated and generally level-headed adult believed vaccines were dangerous and a source of all kinds of illnesses. What's more, I wasn't being very open-minded and needed to seriously consider her beliefs. She had clearly spent more time thinking about vaccines than I had. So I also knew that the next time we inevitably talked about them, I should have my own carefully formed understanding of vaccine issues so that we were on the same page. I thought we'd continue our discussion next Christmas, the next time we would see her, but 2020 had other plans. When the pandemic began, I was met with a familiar feeling of shock and disappointment as I watched disinformation spread rapidly, many people ignoring the advice of medical authorities, and the anti-vaxxer movement came into its own. As the pandemic progressed, I really wanted some super vaccine to return us all to a state of normalcy overnight. But I started to realize that anti-vaxxer sentiment was likely to be a barrier to that fantasy. I found it hard to understand why people chose not to wear masks in public. And I really didn't understand why people were already deciding that once a COVID-19 vaccine came out, they wouldn't take it. In a vortex of misinformation and political polarization, I started to worry about the unnecessary deaths that would come of people not getting vaccines. And I felt really angry towards people who make no effort to slow the spread of the pandemic and save lives. But I also really wanted to understand them better and see what I could learn about them that I might not have considered. My goal is to advocate that people have respectful discourse and dialogue with anti-vaxxers and vaccine-hesitant people. But before you do, let me tell you some tricks I learned for talking to people with very different opinions. My intent was to challenge my understanding of anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, and the vaccine-hesitant, to find out what is most effective in getting people to reconsider their very entrenched beliefs. Tip 1. Listening is a form of disease control. The Ebola outbreak was responded to with the same misinformation and mistrust of science that we have all seen in this passing year. Chek Nyang, a Senegalese medical anthropologist from the World Health Organization, had a simple solution though. He just asked people to write down their stories. He engaged with them and gained their trust just by listening. Trust in vaccines, testing, contact tracing, and mask wearing skyrocketed. I wanted to figure out if I could emulate Nyang by talking to a vaccine-hesitant person respectfully and attentively. I'm not a prodigy child on the brink of inventing a new COVID vaccine, but I can talk to my friends and family about taking it. Tip 2. No matter what you are having a conversation about, it's helpful to do some research ahead of time. I read about the origins of the anti-vaxxer movement and discovered I really didn't understand how bad vaccines used to be. I had known that there was some risk involved with taking them, but not how gross and unhygienic the process was, and how many babies lost arms or even died from them. In Britain in the 19th century, vaccines were very rough approximations of what they are today. So in the case of one smallpox vaccine, which doctors were giving to babies, they took a surgical lancet to make an incision in the baby's arm, smeared it with smallpox pus, and then you would take your baby home and cross your fingers that the wound didn't become infected and that the arm didn't fall off. So, unsurprisingly, parents were freaking out. I mean, a surgical lancet, which turns out to just be an anachronism for a scalpel, doesn't sound like something you'd want near your baby. Pus isn't the most appealing either. So, it is revealing that the first anti-vaxxer movement was started by concerned parents, especially mothers. Tip 3. Do not ostracize the other person. Dr. Jonathan Berman, author of Anti-Vaxxers, How to Challenge a Misinformed Movement, gave me some profound advice for talking to my friend. He suggested that I focus on listening and that I pay attention to my friend's emotional relationship to vaccines, or to be empathic to her. Berman gave me an important note as well. You won't always convince people, almost never. I also talked to Professor Heidi Austin Lawrence, author of Vaccine Rhetorics, who taught me about the importance of pro-vaccine rhetoric in the fight against the coronavirus. According to Lawrence, rhetoric is the ability in all situations to see the available means of persuasion. Rhetoric is what Chek Nyang used to win the battle against Ebola. As Lawrence put it, lots of people have hesitations about this vaccine, and that is reasonable. Affording someone that is huge in a rhetorical situation. It's new technology, a new virus, a new public health initiative. We have a strong history of vaccines being issued during pandemics that do have unexpected population-wide side effects. You're not crazy, you're not stupid, you're not ignorant. I was almost ready to talk with my family friend. But first, I prepared some questions. I made sure to follow the advice I'd been given and the guiding principle of empathy. I wasn't sure how our conversation would end, and I wanted to stay on as good terms as possible with her. I made sure none of my questions were aggressive or judgmental sounding. I tried to steer away from leading or confrontational questions, opting for open-ended ones instead. Finally, it was time to chat with the family friend, and it went great. I learned a lot and came away feeling closer to her than before. This confirmed something big for me. It's better to try and communicate with people, even about disagreements, than to avoid an altercation and let your relationship fester. You might be surprised by what you learn. For example, I did not expect her to tell me she loves social distancing. Heck, I don't love social distancing. She was more accepting of mask wearing than I thought she would be. One of my central questions, whether or not she was planning on taking a COVID-19 vaccine, revealed a misconception I had held since we started talking about her aversion to vaccines. She said she was waiting for studies. Although she expressed a distrust for industry studies, she declared a willingness to vaccinate if she knew the studies were legitimate and trustworthy. I was 100% expecting her to flat out say she would never take another vaccine, COVID or otherwise. So this was a development for me. Her history with vaccines is also something I'd really like to share with you because it finally helped me understand why she was a vaccine choice advocate. She worked for a pharmaceutical company whose Lyme disease vaccine, Limerix, left her with a serious vaccine injury. Limerix was taken off the market later. Her mother and 2 of her daughters may also have experienced vaccine injuries, and I can't imagine the anger and betrayal she must have felt after getting an inflammatory disease from a vaccine made by the company she worked for. And in the end, I still question her decision to refrain from vaccinating herself, but I respect her focus on scientifically rigorous and reputable research, and her desire to do what's best for herself and her children. As Paul McCartney said, we can work it out. This conversation, along with a few others, were always pleasant and not nearly as scary as I expected them to be. My initial goal was to convince people to take the COVID-19 vaccine, and I doubt I did. But I have learned lessons that I will take with me for the rest of my life. By listening, doing my research, being emotionally engaged and empathic, and just taking the leap to reach out to people in the first place. I was able to navigate a difficult topic, and you can too. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing your beautiful faces when we finally reach normalcy.